Hey everyone, in today's video, I'm going to be covering one of the best builds you can use. For my usual reasoning, I've been able to obliterate the toughest bosses in the game so easily, it's honestly been a bit ridiculous. The setup just offers an insane amount of physical damage, status effects, and to top it off, some crazy attack speed. Like I was saying, it's ridiculous. No boss in the game, regardless of how tanky or resistant they are, is going to stand a chance. They all fall way too easily. But anyways, let's actually dive into the build, and we'll start off with the weapons to use. So in our offhand, we're going to be holding the Scavenger's Curved Sword with the Cold Affinity placed on it. Now you don't absolutely need the Scavenger's Curved Sword, any other one would do just fine, except this one comes with an extra 38 bleed buildup, which does help out for proccing some blood losses later on. An interesting fact about using the Cold Affinity is it has a B rating in Intelligence and a C rating for both Strength and Dexterity. In spite of that, we actually get more damage all around in this build when we level up our Dex stat rather than Intelligence, which goes hand in hand with the Frost buildups. When we proc Frost on an enemy, it takes a chunk of their health away, not as much as Bleed does, however it also makes that target take 20% increased damage for 30 seconds. The reason that's really huge is because some enemies in the game are completely resistant to Bleed buildups. Thus, if that's all the build has, it's going to take you a very long time to take them down. Secondly, remember how I said we have a ton of physical damage? If we make a target take 20% increased damage with the amount of attack power we have while being able to swing extremely fast, it's not going to matter if we can proc a bleed buildup because they're going to die really quickly regardless. Lastly, for the Ash of War, we're going to be using Craigblade that increases our weapon's physical damage by 20%, and stance damage by another 20% lasting for 60 seconds. Cause it's in our offhand, we're not going to be able to use the Ash of War, hence it only makes sense to throw something on that would increase its basic attack damage, especially since that's going to be our strongest move. Furthermore, since this weapon swings at ridiculous speeds, and the build is benefited by the Dexterity stat, it would be a good idea to throw on Millicent's Prothesis. It's just going to increase our Dexterity by 5 levels for more damage, and increase our attack power with successive attacks, which is going to be really easy to get going with how quick this sword moves. Now I'll show you guys where you can find all of these items. With the Scavenger's Curved Sword, you can pick this up in the Mount Gelmir area near the first Mount Gelmir campsite Site of Grace. If you can only get your hands on one of these, like I said, you can grab any other curved sword, it's not going to make a massive difference, but it does help out though. Next, you can grab the Ash of War Craigblade by killing a scarab that is found west of the impassable Great Bridge, Site of Grace in Caelid. And finally, for Millicent's Prothesis, there's two ways of acquiring this. The first way, by just killing Millicent on site right after defeating the Godskin Apostle at the Windmill Heights Site of Grace. Or the second option, by just fully completing her questline, that also involves you killing her again, yet with more steps though. Continuing on, we still have one more weapon for our main hand, and for this one, you'll definitely want to have the Scavenger's Curved Sword. Like I said, only one is absolutely needed, however, having two of them is very beneficial. Now with this one, we're actually going to use the Occult variation, making its damage scale with Arcane and increasing the amount of bleed buildup that passively comes with it. So this build is going to be a split between Dex and Arcane, since even when we use the Occult, it still has some scaling with Dex as well, just giving us even more physical damage. Now this may not come as a surprise, but we're going to be using the Ash of War Seppuku on it, which is additionally going to have its bleed buildup bonus increase even further because it's going on an occult weapon. The reason it's insanely powerful is not just from the bleed buildups doing decent damage, but because the way we have our two swords set up. If we look at both of our weapons, we have more bleed buildup than frost buildup total, even if you aren't using a second Scavenger's Curved Sword. Therefore, we're going to proc a blood loss right before a frost buildup that is going to give us a total of 50% increased damage. How are we going to get that? Very simple. Whenever we proc a blood loss, we're going to get a 30% increased damage bonus from two items. The White Mask that gives us a 10% damage buff whenever a blood loss happens near us, and the Lord of Blood's Exultation doing the exact same thing except with a 20% damage boost, both lasting for 20 seconds. Afterwards, we're going to proc a frost buildup almost right away because they'll be roughly close to each other with the amount of buildup they have. Once that goes off, enemies afflicted by frost are then going to take 20% increased damage for 30 seconds. Consequently, we're going to do a total 50% increased damage after proccing Frost and Bleed that are also going to do a ton of damage combined before we absolutely melt whatever enemy or boss stands in front of us. A nice bonus to this is when you're dealing with bosses that are immune to bleed buildups, you'll still be able to proc a Frost buildup that lasts for 30 seconds total. Thus, after you proc that, you can activate the Ash of War Seppuku to get that 30% damage buff since it still counts as a blood loss. You're not going to get bleed buildups off on your target, yet the amount of physical damage you're going to do won't even make a difference in the end. And just like before, I'll show you guys where you can find these items. So you already know with the Scavenger's Curve Sword, you're gonna have to get it in the Mount Gelmir area. In spite of that, it appears you can get only one of these per new game, and like I said, getting one of them is mandatory for your main hand. Instead, I'll show you guys the second best option you can use, and that would be the Flowing Curve Sword. This one can be found in the Consecrated Snowfields in a chest that's on the back of a caravan. Again, you would use the Cold Affinity on this weapon and Occult on the Scavenger's Curve Sword. Then for the Ash of War Seppuku, you can get this in the same area, the mountaintops of the giants, just on the other side of it. You'll have to kill an invisible teardrop scarab that can be found near the freezing lake site of Grace. Don't worry, you'll be able to see its footprints in the snow, hence it's not completely invisible. And lastly, for the Lord of Blood's Exaltation, you can be rewarded this after defeating Esgar, a priest of blood who is found in the Lyondale catacombs. Moving forward, there's still more things to these swords that really make them stand out from the other types of weapons. We know they swing extremely fast, even so, they can swing up to 4 times in an instance just by using the jumping weapon art attack, which is definitely going to be our strongest move. Now since they swing 4 times, it not only speeds up the process of proccing our status effects, but it also increases our attack power and does a lot of damage itself. In fact, it does 25% more damage because of 2 items we use, the Claw Talisman that boosts jumping attacks by 15%, and the Raptor's Black Feathers doing the exact same thing for a 10% bonus instead. You can see how this is going to be our most dominant attack for purely melting bosses and any other strong enemies. On top of this, it stacks up the Millicent's Prothesis Talisman buff, increasing our damage with successive hits extremely rapidly, basically maxing it out in just 2 jumping attacks. There's another 2 talismans that do the exact same thing, however, they're even more effective. The Rotten Wing Insomnia that boosts our damage by a maximum of 13%, and the Winged Sword for a maximum of 10%. Obviously, we don't use both of these cause that would be 5 talismans. And the reason I'm showing you 2 of these is cause the Rotten Wing can only be obtained in a New Game Plus, since you have to choose between Millicent's Prothesis and this. So if you don't want to do a whole New Game Plus, no worries. You can grab the Wing Sword Insomnia, which is only going to do a bit less damage, and it saves you tons of time to get. Once again, I'll show you guys where you can find all of these items. For the Claw Talisman, you can pick this up off of a corpse at the top of a tower in the Stormvale Castle. Afterwards, if you choose to do a New Game Plus in order to get the Rotten Wing Insomnia, you'll have to help out Millicent during her questline and defeat her sister. So don't instantly kill her on sight or else you'll be locked out of getting this. Like I said, if you don't want to do a New Game Plus, no worries. The Wing Sword Insomnia can be rewarded after defeating the Clear Rot Knight in the Stillwater Cave. It's also much easier and quicker to get compared to actually fully finishing Millicent's questline. Now the last thing about the weapons is they do melt bosses insanely quickly, except when it comes to strong regular enemies, I'd recommend using a different Ash of War on one of your swords, like Sword Dance, just because you're not going to have your weapons constantly buffed during your entire playthrough, and you'll want something to deal with those enemies that are around the corner. It's not a huge issue because you can always change the Ash of War back whenever you want to. So that covers about everything for our weapons and talismans, yet we do have some other ways of increasing their damage even more, with one of them being the Flask of Wondrous Physic. What I found to be the best tiers to use is the Thorny Crack tier that increases our attack power with successive attacks, just like the Rotten Wing Talisman, but this reaches a maximum of 20%, which is very huge for this build. Definitely recommended. Then the second one, there's not really anything that will heavily benefit this build. Even so, I am using the Opaline Hard tier to raise our physical damage negation by 15% just to help cancel out some of the negative effects of our second buff, the Blood Boil Aromatic. This second buff isn't mandatory to get, thus I am going to throw in an alternative option as well. So what this buff does is it improves our physical damage by 30% and our maximum stamina by 20%,
while lasting for 60 seconds. The part where the opaline hard tier comes into play is this buff makes us take 25% increased damage as well. However, the hard tier makes us take 15% reduced damage. Hence, it's actually just going to make us take 10% increased damage instead, which is very well worth it. Now, since this is a consumable item and nobody really likes farming, you can grab a dagger or any other light weapon and throw on the Ash of War Golden Vow. It's not going to be as effective, giving us an 11.5% damage buff and a 7.5% damage negation buff lasting for 45 seconds. The upsides to this is it's much easier to get and it's completely reusable. Combining this and the opaline hard tier is also going to turn your character into a tank with how much damage negation you'll have, which is really nice considering how much attack power we have. As usual, I'll show you guys where you can find these items. For the Thorny Crack tier, this one can be acquired after killing an avatar boss who can be found near the minor Erd tree in the consecrated snowfield. Beforehand, you can grab the opaline hard tier that is rewarded after killing the same boss, except this one is located near the minor Erd tree in Caelid. Then, to make the Blood Boil aromatic, I'm just going to display all of the locations to where you can get the crafting supplies. Again, if this is not your thing, you can always go and grab the Ash of War Golden Vow after killing a mounted knight in Limgrave. Now, since that covers everything for the buffs, we can move on to the armor we use and finish off with the minimum stats required. So we already know we're going to be using the White Mask for a 10% damage increase whenever a blood loss happens near us, and the Raptor's Black Feathers for an additional 10% damage to our jumping attacks. Nevertheless, the gloves and legs aren't too important, so you can just use whatever heavy armor you have to make up for the helmet and chest piece. For me, I went with the Mausoleum set just because I like the way it looks while it offers a pretty fair amount of protection. These are the final items to this build, so I'll show you guys where you can get them. With the White Mask, you'll have to kill one of the 3 nameless White Mask invaders that can spawn in the Mogwin Dynasty Mausoleum area. Then you can acquire the Raptor's Black Feathers in the Sage's Cave that'll be behind an illusionary wall. For the gloves and boots, like I said, any heavy to medium armor will do, but if you want the exact armor I'm using, you can farm the boots and gloves off of the knight that spawns just outside of the Black Knife Catacombs. Because that covers all of the items for this build, we can finish off with the stats required. So to use everything effectively in this setup, you'll need at least 9 dex and 14 strength. That's it. Afterwards, you'll want to split your points between dex and arcane, yet you'll want to put more into arcane to have a higher bleed buildup and more physical damage for the Scavenger's Curve Sword. Now that fully covers everything for this build. Before I end the video off, I do want to give a big thanks to the members of my channel for supporting me on my videos and the future ones to come. If you guys want to become a member as well, there will be a button at the bottom right of this video to click on. If not, no worries. I'm just happy you made it to the end of this video. With that being said, thanks for watching, and I hope I see you all in the next one.